One of our programs with the Parks and Natural Resources Division is our Environmental Lands Program. And this program had its start over 20 years ago and has just successfully completed a run. It was a 20-year referendum that allowed us to purchase and manage environmental lands in Polk County. We've acquired over 26,000 acres of land, natural lands, of which we manage about 18,000 acres. The remainder of the property was purchased with partners, which they manage those properties. This program has been exceptionally successful. The purchases of the properties, we brought in 70% of the money to purchase these lands was from outside agencies. So we've really more than matched our money locally.
My involvement started in 1990. Actually, I was vice chairman of the local Sierra Club group, and we became very interested in having our own environmental lands program in Polk County. And we had looked at Hillsborough County's ELAP program as a potential model for what we thought our county ought to do. And so at one of our Sierra Club meetings, we had Commissioner Jan Platt from Hillsborough County and the person that was helping operate their program come over to our group and talk to us about how their program was established and how it operated. And that was basically the launching point for a citizen campaign to get an environmental lands program in Polk County.
I think the success of this program, and I think it's been highly successful, began with its roots. This was a citizen initiative. This wasn't something that Polk County government decided to do. It had its roots back in the development, back in 1990s, the development of the county's comprehensive plan, where the discussion of protecting endangered and threatened species within the county, preserving some of the natural lands that are found nowhere else, came about. And the decision was made during the comp plan process was that maybe we should ask the public whether or not some of these lands were worth purchasing. And from that, we had a referendum. This referendum was almost entirely citizen-driven. The community got together. It was a group of people, environmentalists, business leaders, land managers, and made the case to the public in Polk County that we do have valuable lands that need to be protected. And it did pass in 1994, and the Environmental Lands Program got underway in 1995.
It took 4 years to do it, but it actually came to pass. My role in the effort primarily was just one of advocate. The second time around with the standalone environmental lands program, I gave 27 speeches myself, and we had a terrific group of people working on this effort. People from the Lake Wales area, Babson Park, Lakeland, Winter Haven, people from everywhere really interested in this. One of the important factors that we were looking at was looking to preserve important lands in all the different parts of the county. We thought it was important to look at the Kissimmee River Valley, the Green Swamp in particular, also look at lands in the Peace River system because of how much property in that area had been mined. So there was very little left that was high value as far as the environment goes. We also wanted to look at obtaining scrub properties because they are so endangered.
You know, I can't overstate the importance of citizen input into this process. The County Commission did establish a Citizens Advisory Committee known as CLASSIC, the Conservation Land Acquisition Selection Advisory Committee. And this committee spent literally months developing criteria on what were environmental lands. The concerns at the time was, and I'll just be quite frank, that there wasn't a lot of faith in government in Polk County. We had had some mishaps and some issues that came up. And so when this Citizen Advisory Committee started work, they wanted to make sure that when the public voted on this referendum, they knew exactly what they were voting on.
As far as the citizen initiative was concerned, like I said, we had a terrific group of people, probably 25 people or more, that were capable of giving presentations. We had a lady who, that was her sole job, was setting up engagements for us to give talks to people who would listen. I mean, that was literally almost every type of social group, organized social group that you could think of, from the Kiwanis Club, Rotary, different women's groups, bass fishermen, you name it. We found them and we approached them to have a presentation.
One of the challenges when this referendum passed was the fact that the county did not have staff to run this program. So one of our first things was to acquire a staffing person to be in charge of it. And we were very, very fortunate that we could hire Gaye Sharpe to be with the program. And that really helped us because Gaye Sharpe is still with the program, so she saw the entire 20 years of this referendum through, and so we had that consistency. But we needed to have somebody to be in charge, and what made Gaye such a great person for this program was the fact that she was born and raised in Polk County, so she knew Polk County. She came from an agricultural family, so she could really relate to a lot of the landowners.
Well, how I became involved with Polk County dealing with natural resources was, in the beginning, I worked in the water resources for Polk County, and we were looking at areas that were very important as far as riverine systems, and I worked on applications to try to find property that we could protect in the future. So preempt of any kind of program, we went after grants with the South Florida Water Management District, and were very successful in being awarded a grant for Lake Marian Creek. So that kind of started the initial land acquisition program where we agreed that if there was a local program that we would match and go forward with the South Florida Water Management District to buy along Lake Marian Creek. At about that same time, there was this big citizens push to have a local funded program. The comprehensive plan was in place that said we would, protect so many environmental lands a year, and that preempted with the grassroots efforts of all these citizens saying, yes, we want a program. We want something to be permanent as far as protection of these wonderful resources. So that came about in 1994. It was put before the public, and the public did agree that they wanted to tax themselves for those important natural resources. So that initiated the program.
But we still needed additional help, and that's where our Citizens Advisory Committee helped us, and there was also another group called Green Horizons Land Trust. They helped us identify some of those additional properties and bring some properties to the county for us to consider.
After the referendum passed, my role actually changed because I became a member of the Classic Committee, and I also was asked to serve on the Technical Advisory Group, which evaluated properties that were nominated to the program.
Every parcel we looked at, we had an independent appraisal done on that property. And then we sat down and negotiated with the property owner. Again, it was a willing seller type deal. If we couldn't negotiate, we shook hands and left, and if we could negotiate a price, then we took it to the Board of County Commissioners, who had the final say on the purchase of those properties.
In the early days when we started the program, it was awesome because there were so many really special sites out there, and we were able to get on people's property that were willing to possibly entertain an offer to have their property purchased for the Environmental Lands Program. And we got to see all kinds of wildlife and habitat out there, and that maybe nobody ever gets to see because it was in private ownership. It was a little overwhelming having so many different sites that people were interested in participating into the program. So we had to come up, as part of the ordinance that was originally set up, some kind of criteria to go by to evaluate these sites, and we used a technical group to go out on these individual sites and score them. So there'd be a lot of consistency on which lands merit the acquisition for, forever for the environmental lands and the protection of the natural resources.
And so they did great detail of what specifically were environmental lands. They developed a criteria that ranked every piece of property out there that would be nominated for this program. So that made sure that there was really a check and balance, that we wouldn't be buying something that wasn't truly environmental. We looked at, were there endangered species on the property? Was it close to schools? Was there recreation potential for the property? Could the property be managed? Did it need to be restored? Was there restoration potential? Could it be restored? And so they looked at these criteria. The Classic also established a technical advisory group that was made up of land management specialists and an environmental specialist that actually walked each piece of property that was considered, and they applied this criteria and came up with a numeric ranking. And property went through this process, and it could be determined, and several properties were, that these weren't environmental lands, or they couldn't be restored to the proper level that they needed to be. They also determined some lands had potential but needed help, and those lands could only be purchased if we could find a partner to join with us, a water management district or the state or federal government. And then they had what they called their Group A category. These lands were so valuable that we should go out and try to acquire them.
I'm basically a habitat generalist, and my focus is always the big picture and connectivity to other lands. The TAG group, however, was made up of a bunch of different specialists, in particular, people who were experts in botany, soil science, animal habitats and different species, people who were expert in scrub habitat, that type of thing. And so in advance of visiting a site, staff would send us information about the soil types, the topography. We'd also get maps about the connectivity between other conservation lands, because one of the great things about our program is that we added and buffered existing conservation lands that were held by the state and other agencies.
We kept it somewhat open for the criteria because you had so many different pieces of property. We would go from like a 25 acre to a 4,000 acre. But how we evaluated it was we looked at the water resources, whether you were on a lake, on a river, was it a recharge area? Then we looked at the wildlife. Did it have enough habitat to support the different species and sustain species? And as you look at that, you may have something as small as a sand skink, that doesn't require as much acreage, to something as huge, as our bobcats and our deer and other things that take a lot more acreage. So you had to kind of evaluate that and score on the criteria. And then we looked at the type of wilderness, the habitat that is there, is it sustainable? Can we manage it over time? Because even if you have a wonderful piece of property, if you cannot manage that property for those species and for the water resources, then over time the value will diminish, and so what you actually purchased it for would not over time sustain itself. So that's important, and that was all looked into when we went out there with that technical group. It was amazing being with those people because they have so much knowledge. I learned so much, and it is very helpful to have people with different backgrounds, because you would have a botanist there, you would have somebody who's a wildlife expert, a water resource expert, and we're all coming together and talking about a piece of property and helping to evaluate and get the best of the best. And that's what was really special about the program, was having those opportunities to look at those properties.
One of the big challenges we faced was that with one staff person, we wanted to make this property, we had to look at restoration of some of the properties. We had to protect some of the properties. Some of the properties had garbage dumped on them or were not protected by fencing or managed properly, had not had any controlled burns or exotics removal. So we had to add some additional staff, and we've really done with minimal staff to maintain these programs.
The tag trips usually would take at least a half a day. We'd go out and pack our lunches and go out there and just tromp all over the property, drive all over the property, and just evaluate it for its natural resource value, its management ability, and also recreational potentials.
Another important factor was that no lands were condemned. I mean, government can take property under certain circumstances, but in this particular case, we were looking at strictly willing sellers. People that wanted to see their property protected. And what we found out, that there were a lot of people that didn't want to see their lands, their family lands, turn into a development. They wanted to see it remain natural, but maybe they couldn't keep it. And so we were approached by more people than we could handle, or even lands that we could purchase, and so we had an opportunity to select the best of the best.
When we first started off, we did get a lot of nominations into the program, and it varied from scrub to flatwoods, green swamp area. So when we were going out there and looking at it with the property owners, they may have a different perspective than what you would from an environmental lands perspective. While they love their property or was attached to the property, maybe due to business reasons, they decided that they needed to sell the property. Some of the surprises that we had when we went out there, we would go out to a scrub site, and where the property owner may be very proud of certain parts of their property, maybe the flatwoods section associated with the scrub and some of that other. In their opinion, they would say that scrub, the only good thing it is to hold the world together. They did not look at it as a true value because you really didn't grow a lot of crops on it. Cows, not a lot of grass on it. So it depended, the perspective. Whereas when our technical people would get out there, the property owner would be over here showing us this, and then they'd run over here and look at the scrub aspect and say and ooh and ah and just be so excited. And the property owner is going, I didn't even know why y'all are even interested in that part. I thought y'all would be interested in this. But it was a learning process for both the property owner and for us to see there's different aspects of your property that you may not have even thought we would be interested in. And that was some surprises both for the property owner and then surprises for us to not, when we were discussing initial, because they give us a package and explain why the property should be evaluated, they may not have even brought that up because it wasn't significant to them. They didn't think we would have an interest in that. So those were some of the cool surprises. I would say one of the really great things is working with all the people that own these properties, hearing their stories, how they had some of the property that we've acquired, people were born on a shack way back when on that property, but over time, due to their health or other reasons, they've got to make other decisions and they would like to see it preserved. So this made you feel good that maybe you were able to meet their goals, meet the county's goals for the protection of the resources, and come together, for something really, really wonderful. And that's, I think, what makes me so passionate about the program, just meeting those wonderful people and then knowing we're protecting those natural resources.
When this program began, we had looked, with several others, water management districts and saw what they were doing. We also looked to our adjacent counties. There was some property that really had everybody's interest, and that was Lake Marian Creek. This was a natural watershed, a free-flowing stream, but there was tremendous growth pressure in the area. The South Florida Water Management District had a very strong interest in this property, but they weren't willing to commit at that time. And so we presented this to the county commission. It was kind of interesting that our county commissioners, when the first purchase of land down in Lake Marian Creek was being considered, all 5 of our county commissioners went down to West Palm Beach to urge the South Florida Water Management District to make the first step. When the South Florida Water Management District agreed to purchase the first piece of property on Lake Marian Creek, one of the statements made was, okay, we'll purchase the first one, but Polk County, you have to be ready to help us. And so when the referendum passed, we identified the next parcel there. We had a willing seller. We had an agreement with South Florida Water Management District, and we jointly purchased that property together.
I would say when we first started with the program, we just had our first acquisition was with South Florida Water Management District, the Lake Marian Creek, and then that was several thousand acres, and they were the lead managing agency. Then we acquired Hickory Lake Scrub, which was just like 50 acres. And the management on a scrub is so different learning than the management on a larger piece. And so that was intriguing, trying to figure out how we were going to do that management on the scrub. And then we acquired some other smaller properties like Crooked Lake Sandhill, only 25 acres. And then we got like the Crooked Lake Prairie, which is over 500 acres. So we had to build a team of people that could do the land management. But as part of that, we also did a lot of research what other surrounding counties were doing for management, understanding prescribed fire, invasives, how were you going to approach using the most effective ways of managing it for the money. The one good thing about our program was it was originally set up, we had learned that we need management funds, where some of the counties that had earlier programs didn't take that into account, perpetual maintenance. Polk County was very aggressive in that and saying we're going to set aside some money for acquisition, and then we're going to set some aside in this management trust fund, and that money will be used to manage these properties forever. So that there was this balance that we would acquire property but then have money to manage that property. So that gave us a lot of flexibility to be able to really look at what those properties need and try to get in there and manage it up front instead of reacting later after you have a problem and trying to get the site under management.
The other challenge we had was the fact that the county was very strong in the opinion that these were lands that were purchased with public money, and that if they are public lands, they ought to be open to the public to use. And so one of our first things we did was we developed a public use ordinance for environmental lands that made sure that the public would have access to them, but the overriding theme of this was these lands were purchased to protect the environment and the endangered species that lived on these properties. So we had to have that balance. But when you bring on public to property, then it requires additional management. You have to have parking areas, you have to have trash cans, you have to have bathrooms, and you have to have trails. You have to maintain those trails. And while we have a tremendous volunteer group that helps us, we had to bring on additional staff to do that. And as I mentioned, we've acquired some 18,000 acres that we manage. Some of it requires, we do burns on these properties, so you have to have burn bosses and certifications for that. And we do have a great staff that does that now.
What that did was allow us to open it up to the public more, to have those management dollars. When we had that trust fund and we were able to hire staff to come in, besides just myself trying to do all this as we acquired more and more property, it takes managing the natural resources, but I would say it's probably even more intense to manage for the trails and the user groups. We want to have them out there, but to do that, it does very time consuming to keep all the trails mowed, to keep the signage up and those kinds of things. So that's what having management staff has helped us do. And it's a wonderful thing for our community here to have that opportunity to be able to get out there. When I was a kid, I grew up around here. I ran around in the woods. People didn't have it fenced off. You had an opportunity to see that. Now, that's not the situation, so it's really wonderful that we have these special pieces that we can open up for people to come out and run around and experience what I did as a kid, because now these are for the public and anybody can come out on the site.
They started picking up in speed as time went by. We were very fortunate that the referendum allowed us to bond the money. We never actually bonded the money. We did take out some short-term loans, but we made the conscious decision to go to do what's called a pay-as-you-go. And so we were if you bond money, you have to spend it within a certain amount of time, so there's this pressure to negotiate a deal, and you may not get the best deals. And we were very concerned we wanted to make sure the public was really getting the best deal for their money. And so with a pay-as-you-go program, we could slowly purchase the property and add on to our inventory of lands, and we didn't have to rush at one time to do that. One of our biggest challenges is the Circle B Bar Reserve property that was purchased in 2000, but this one, we learned from some of the earlier ones. We purchased some beautiful lands that are in the far ranges of the county, and sometimes the public won't just venture out 20, 30 miles to go look at land. So we wanted something that was close to the urban areas that had a lot of potential to get the public's interest. And when the property owner for Circle B Bar Ranch approached us, we acquired this knowing it was going to need a lot of restoration, but we also knew that it had a great road network. It was right between Lakeland, Bartow, Auburndale, and Winter Haven. And we've been very, very successful bringing the public here. But bringing the public here brings a whole new set of challenges to deal with the literally tens of thousands of people that walk through the gates every day.
And looking back over the program for the last 20 years, in the beginning, I had no idea that we would accomplish what we have accomplished now. When you first start off, you're just trying to understand process and get it in place. And we did, I think, a tremendous job not really knowing exactly the whole direction we were going in. We've protected places along the Peace River, the Alafai River, Kissimmee, in the Green Swamp, on the ridges. So all those pieces that we thought in the very beginning were so important and so valuable, there has been property acquired in those places that will be protected forever. So I think that is tremendous. We've also had people investigate our program to see how efficient and effective we were with the funds. And they came back and said, we can't believe it. There's very little administration involved in it, and you're accomplishing so much on the impacts of protecting these natural resources. So that was, I guess, a great feeling that we were able to do what we said, which is we were going to take the money and use it for the protection of the natural resources and manage it, and then open it to the public where we could. Because there, in the very beginning, I can tell you there were a lot of people that did not think that government could back up its promise, that they would not be very efficient or effective in doing that, and that they may take the money and do something else with it. But that is not what happened, and I think there's a lot of support now because the commissioners levied the money, and then they did with it what they said they were going to do with it, which was to buy the natural lands and manage the natural lands.
I think this program has been more successful than my wildest dreams. I knew we were going to acquire some property. I didn't realize how successful we could be, and part of that was the citizen input, the fact that we had a great program. A good part was that we had great partners. We actually worked with 3 different water management districts in the state of Florida to acquire lands together, and we've got a network of properties out there that I think we all can be very proud of.
As Jeff said, it's successful beyond my wildest dreams, especially the amount of public support that we have and the number of volunteers that are helping the program and the astonishing number of visitors that come to Circle B, especially from places far and wide.
I would say what's kind of different for the future for us is we're going now more to conservation easements and looking at that. And that's another method of protection of the natural resources where it can remain in agriculture, which is just a huge benefit for Polk County to have that type of opportunity. It benefits the landowner, and then it also benefits the natural resources. So that's where we're kind of evolving a little bit in with our program.